What happened that night was something I could have never expected. Feeling my son instead of my wife, it was one of the most bizarre yet unforgettable nights of my life. It started like any other quiet evening in our home. The house carried its usual calm after dinner, the faint hum of the dishwasher running in the kitchen and the subtle creak of wood as the house settled for the night. I had no idea this night would forever alter the way I saw everything, my life, my family, and even myself. My name is Peter, and until recently, I thought I had everything figured out. I'm 43, a hard-working man who built a modest but happy life for myself. My wife Laura and I have been married for 18 years. Though our marriage has had its ups and downs, I always believed we were solid. We have 2 kids, my daughter Clara, who's off at college now, and my 19-year-old son Ethan, who still lives at home while attending community college. Ethan has always been a quiet kid. Laura and I often joked that he was the calm to Clara's storm. Where she was all fire and energy, Ethan preferred to stay in his room reading or tinkering with whatever new project had captured his interest. Over the years, I sometimes worried he might feel a little overshadowed by his sister or even by Laura and me. But whenever I asked, he would smile and assure me he was fine. As he got older, though, I noticed little changes in him. He seemed more withdrawn, and his usual shy smiles turned into fleeting glances. There were moments when I'd catch him looking at me, his eyes holding something I couldn't quite place, something searching, almost questioning. I chalked it up to teenage awkwardness and never gave it much thought. Laura had been out of town for a few days on one of her frequent work trips. She worked for an events company and often traveled for conferences and planning sessions. It was nothing out of the ordinary, and I had grown used to holding down the fort while she was away. Clara was busy with her studies, so it was just Ethan and me at home. The first night after Laura left, Ethan seemed quieter than usual. We had dinner together, and I tried to make conversation, asking him about school and his latest project, a 3D model he'd been working on. For weeks, Ethan had been acting strangely. He answered politely when spoken to, but with few words, his eyes darting to mine and then away again, like he was nervous about something. "You all right, bud?" I asked, frowning. "You've been kind of quiet tonight." He gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess," he replied. I didn't push it. Ethan had always been more reserved, and I figured he'd open up if something was really bothering him. Letting it go, I went to bed as usual. Laura's side of the bed felt emptier than ever, and I found myself missing her presence, the warmth of her body next to mine, the soft murmur of her voice as she drifted off to sleep. I turned off the lights, closed my eyes, and let the rhythmic sounds of the house lull me into slumber. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke to the faintest creak of the bedroom door opening. Squinting into the darkness, my heart skipped a beat. The room was silent except for the sound of my own breathing and the faint rustle of fabric as someone moved closer. "Laura?" I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. My first thought was that she had come home early, surprising me. But the figure didn't respond. Instead, the mattress dipped slightly as the person sat down on the edge of the bed. My groggy mind tried to piece together what was happening. Before I could fully wake up, I felt a soft hand on the top of my leg. It was such a familiar gesture, Laura's hand on my arm or leg, her way of grounding me, her way of saying she was there. But something felt off. The hand lingered too long, the touch too tentative, as if whoever it was trying to mimic her movements but didn't quite know how. I opened my eyes, my vision adjusting to the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the blinds. What I saw made my heart stop. Sitting beside me wasn't Laura, it was Ethan. "Ethan?" I said, my voice a mix of confusion and alarm. "What are you doing?" He didn't move, his hand still resting lightly on my arm. His face was partially shadowed, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sitting up now. My pulse was racing, and I could feel the heat of his hand through the fabric of my shirt. "Dad," he interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to wake you." I frowned, my confusion only growing. "Then why are you?" He hesitated, his hand dropping away as he looked down at the floor. "I don't know," he said quietly. I wanted to make sure you were okay." I blinked at him, unsure of what to say. The way he was looking at me, so unsure, so vulnerable, made my chest tighten. "I'm fine, Ethan," I said gently. "But you should be in bed. It's late." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he stood up, his shoulders slumped. "Yeah, sorry. I'll go." As he turned to leave, something in me wanted to stop him. I didn't know what it was, maybe the way he looked so defeated, or the strange feeling of guilt twisting in my gut, but I let him go, watching as he disappeared through the door. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling as my mind raced. What had that been about? Why had he come into my room like that? And why did it leave me feeling so unsettled? But the craziest part was that it didn't end there. Oh no, the story definitely didn't end there, not yet. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I had barely slept after Ethan's unexpected visit, my mind unable to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the moment, the way he sat on the bed, the hesitation in his voice, the way his hand lingered on me, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. It was unsettling, but not in the way I expected. I shook the thoughts away as I got ready for the day. By the time I went downstairs, Ethan was already at the table, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, his expression unreadable, but there was a tightness in his posture that hadn't been there before. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "You're up early." "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet. "Had trouble sleeping." I hesitated for a moment before pouring myself a cup of coffee and sitting down across from him. "Ethan, about last night." "I'm sorry," he interrupted, his voice sharper than I expected. "I didn't mean to freak you out or anything. I shouldn't have come into your room." "It's okay," I said quickly. I was worried." "You seemed upset." He shrugged, his gaze dropping back to his phone. "It's nothing. Forget about it." But I couldn't forget about it. The way he had looked at me, the way he had touched my arm, it was too deliberate, too meaningful to be brushed off as nothing. In some way, it had excited me. I couldn't quite place it, and the craziest part was that I felt something from his side too. I wanted to ask him more, to figure out what was going on in his head, but something in his body language warned me to leave it alone, for now. And so, for that moment, I did. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Ethan stayed in his room. Here's a more concise and structured arrangement of the text you provided. I busied myself with chores and errands, trying to shake the lingering unease from the night before. By evening, I was exhausted and ready to collapse into bed. I tried not to think about what had happened, but my mind kept wandering. What had driven Ethan to come into my room like that? Was he going through something he wasn't telling me about? Or was there something else I didn't want to admit? At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the sound of the door creaking open woke me. My heart jumped as I sat up, squinting into the darkness. "Laura?" I murmured, even though I knew it wasn't her. The figure in the doorway hesitated before stepping inside. Moonlight revealed Ethan's familiar frame. My pulse quickened, a mix of confusion and something else I couldn't name. "Ethan?" I said, my voice tinged with concern and frustration. "What's going on? Why are you here again?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, just like the night before. He was wearing a loose t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair messy from sleep. His posture had a vulnerability that tugged at something deep inside me. "I'm sorry," he said softly, staring at the floor. I know this is weird. I didn't want to be alone. Why? I asked gently. What's going on, Ethan? You can talk to me. He hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I don't know, he admitted. Mom's gone. Clara's not here. The house feels so empty. I guess I just wanted to feel close to someone. His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on my own loneliness in Laura's absence that I hadn't considered how it might be affecting Ethan. He'd always been quiet and reserved, but maybe that was his way of coping with the same feelings I was struggling with. It's okay, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're not alone, Ethan. I'm here. He looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine. For a moment, the air between us felt charged with something I couldn't explain. I gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze and smiled, trying to ease the tension. Come on, I said, patting the bed. If it helps, you can stay here for a bit. But you have to promise to actually sleep, all right? I wasn't sure why I said that because, deep down, I felt like I didn't want to go back to sleep either. He nodded. A small smile broke through his nervous expression. All right, thanks, Dad, Ethan said softly. He lay down on the other side of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. I turned off the light and closed my eyes, trying to ignore the strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. The room was silent except for the sound of our breathing, but I could still feel his presence beside me, a warm, steady pulse. At some point, I drifted off, though it was a restless sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, my senses on high alert. I wasn't sure what had woken me at first, but then I felt it, a light, hesitant touch on my arm. Ethan? I whispered, my voice groggy. He didn't answer, but his hand lingered, brushing gently against my skin. The tender, deliberate gesture caught me off guard, leaving my breath hitched in my throat. My mind screamed at me to say something, to stop this before it went further, but my body refused to move. Dad, he murmured, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I turned my head to look at him, my heart pounding. His face was inches from mine, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and longing I couldn't ignore. Before I could say anything, he leaned in, his lips brushing against my cheek, a fleeting, gentle gesture that left me stunned. What are you doing? I asked, my voice trembling, not in fear, but in uncertainty. I don't know, he admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know. The air in the room grew thick with tension, silence stretching between us like a taut wire. I wanted to say something, to break the spell, but I was frozen. My thoughts raced too fast to make sense of. Ethan pulled back slightly, his expression a mix of shame and desperation. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I shouldn't have done that. I'll go. The way his lips had barely brushed my cheek, it was too much, too strange. And yet, it was impossible to push from my mind. Ethan avoided me all morning. He stayed in his room with the door closed, and I didn't have the courage to knock. I told myself he probably needed space to process whatever had happened. Honestly, so did I. But as the hours dragged on, the tension in the house became unbearable. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I found myself standing outside his door, my hand hovering just inches from the wood. For a moment, I considered walking away, but then I knocked softly. Ethan, I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Can we talk? There was a long pause before I heard his footsteps approaching. When he opened the door, he looked different. His usual guarded expression was replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable, and it made my chest ache. Hey, he said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. I walked into his room, taking a moment to glance around. It was neat and orderly, just like him, but there was an air of hesitation hanging over the space. He gestured for me to sit on the bed, and I obliged, though my nerves were screaming at me to leave. I just wanted to check in, I said after a moment. About last night. He winced, his shoulders hunching slightly. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I know it was weird. I shouldn't have. Ethan, I interrupted, holding up a hand. It's okay. I'm not mad. I need to understand what's going on. And I want to tell you something. He hesitated, his hands fidgeting in his lap. I don't know, he admitted finally. I guess I just feel really alone sometimes. And when Mom's gone, it's like. I don't know. Like the house feels empty, even with you here. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had always tried to be a good father, but hearing him say he felt alone, it stung. Ethan, I'm sorry if I've made you feel like that, I said gently. You're not alone, okay? I'm here for you. Always. He nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed on the floor. I know, he said softly. It's not the same. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward slightly. He took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists. It's hard to explain, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's like I want to be close to you, but not in the way I'm supposed to. And I don't know what to do with that. His words hung in the air, heavy and raw. My stomach churned as I struggled to process what he was saying. Dad, he said, yes, son, I'd love to. And so he did, climbing straight onto my bed. His weight caused the mattress to dip slightly. He sat there for a moment, his hands resting on his knees, before reaching out and placing a hand on my arm. Dad, he said softly, his voice trembling, please excuse me like a mom. I stared at him, my mind screaming at me to stop this, to say something, anything, that would put an end to whatever was happening. But I couldn't. The look in his eyes, the raw emotion in his voice, rendered me completely powerless. Ethan, this isn't. I began, but he cut me off. Don't, he whispered, his hand tightening on my arm. Just let me stay, please. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Okay, I said finally, my voice shaky. But we need to talk about this in the morning. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Thank you, he murmured as he lay down beside me. I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me, fear, guilt, and something dangerously close to anticipation. I turned around, and our eyes met immediately. There was a tension that we both couldn't resist. We both knew what was going to happen. I sat up, my mind racing. This isn't okay, I said, though my voice wavered. You need to go back to your room. I don't want to, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. I don't care if it's wrong. I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. Before I could respond, he reached out his hand, brushing against my cheek. The touch was soft, almost reverent, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Ethan, please, I whispered, my voice trembling. This isn't. He leaned in, then, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both tentative and insistent. My mind screamed at me to stop, to push him away, but my body refused to listen. As we stood there, everything else disappeared. The fear, the guilt, the impossibility of it all, it was all gone. There was only Ethan, his touch, his warmth, his desperation. In that moment, I couldn't bring myself to pull away. The kiss lingered, longer than it should have, longer than it had any right to. Ethan's lips were soft, hesitant, but there was an urgency behind them. I knew I should stop, but my body betrayed me. I was frozen in the moment, unable to act. When Ethan finally pulled back, his eyes searched mine, brimming with a mix of fear, longing, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. Ethan, I said, my voice barely a whisper. We can't, this isn't. I know it's wrong, he interrupted, his voice trembling. But I don't care. I can't keep pretending. Dad, I can't keep hiding how I feel. You don't mean that, I said, shaking my head. You're confused. This isn't real. It is real, Ethan said firmly, his eyes locking onto mine. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. His words hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me breathless and disoriented. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was mistaken, but the conviction in his voice, the raw honesty in his gaze, made it impossible to deny. I don't know what to do with this, I admitted, my voice cracking under the weight of the moment. You don't have to fix anything, Ethan said, reaching out to take my hand. His touch was warm, grounding, and it made my pulse quicken despite my better judgment. Just let me in, please. I pulled my hand away, my chest tightening with a mix of fear and guilt. Ethan, this isn't about what I want. It's about what's right. And this isn't right. Something shifted inside me, and I no longer held back. Ethan leaned in, and we kissed again. This time, it was different, better, more intense. While kissing, he touched me in ways Laura would. It escalated from kissing to more, and from bad to worse. I couldn't stop it, and I didn't want to. The experience was amazing, intense, sensitive, and, from Ethan's perspective, a bit hurtful. He had taken his role as Laura seriously, evident in the way he mentioned my name afterward. We lay there, unsure what had just happened. Are you okay, son? I asked. Yes, Dad. Don't worry about me, he replied. Let me go to the bathroom, and let's just go to sleep. The morning after, I woke up early, thinking about the previous night. Ethan stayed in his room most of the day, while I tried to distract myself with chores and errands. My mind kept drifting back to him, remembering the raw, vulnerable look in his eyes. As evening rolled around, Ethan appeared in the doorway, looking hesitant. Can I sit? He asked quietly. I nodded, unable to refuse him. He sat beside me on the couch, leaving space between us. I'm sorry, he said after a silence. For making things weird. I didn't mean to. I just didn't know how to handle it. I placed a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, we'll figure this out. He looked at me, his eyes filled with vulnerability. Do you hate me? He asked barely above a whisper. Of course not, I replied immediately. I could never hate you, Ethan. You're my son. He flinched at the word but didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into my touch. I just want to be close to you, he said, trembling. I don't care how. I just need you. His words broke something inside me, and I pulled him into a hug. I'm here, I whispered. I'll always be here for you. For a moment, it felt like everything might be okay. We could find a way to move past this and rebuild our relationship. But as he pulled back, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, the familiar tension crept back in. Thank you, he said softly, for not giving up on me. I nodded, my throat tight. As he stood to leave, I grabbed his hand. Ethan, we'll figure this out together. He smiled, a small, tentative smile. I know we will, he said, and walked away. I couldn't shake the feeling that our story was far from over. The lines we had drawn were blurring, and though I didn't know what the future held, one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to drop your comment. Like and subscribe for more true crime stories.